why not have more options and more things to choose from, more possibility of flavor? That's always going to be what I'm drawn to. All right.
I entirely agree. Sorry.
No. Do another take of that. You entirely agree, where I'm not interrupting you.
I entirely agree.
All right, for my first action, I'd like to talk about World Anvil. World Anvil lets you go from massive binders of notes to a nice cohesive online platform where you can organize all your information into one simple, easy, manageable system. You can keep track of NPCs, where my fourth action went, player backstories, and so much more. For my second action, I'd like to use the showing off action, where I can tell you that you can upload custom NPC stat blocks directly to your campaign. And all it takes is just one search and you can find any NPC that you have curtailed to your world. Makes finding that tavern keeper a little faster. For my last action, I want to tell everyone that World Anvil is an amazing product for amazing GMs, so check it out. Hey GM, what does multiple attack penalty mean? And we're live. Hello! We're back with another interview. I'm so excited. Welcome back to another Deadly D8 interview. I am your host, James. We are joined by two amazing special guests today. I want to first say hi to the channel head, essentially. Say hi, Eli.
Hey everyone, my name is Eli. I'm the editor for Deadly D8 primarily. I put together all of our videos and I do the posting of them.
And today we are joined by Michael Sayre.
Hey, I'm Michael Sayre. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a designer at Paizo working on the Pathfinder RPG.
So, Michael, one of the reasons I was really excited to bring you on is because I've really meshed with your general game design philosophy. So my question for you is, tell us about your game design philosophy and what elements of TTRPGs you find yourself often highlighting.
It's an interesting question. I will say, so the current design team, we've all had our like different specialties that we've brought to the table, right? Like Mark's math skills are just truly next level, not surprising for someone who graduated from MIT, you know? And then Logan is someone who has just had a ton of industry experience, is very good about watching, you know, kind of what is the story of the game. Let's make sure that everything is flowing. James is really good at presentation, and that has kind of like freed me up to do what I really like to do best, which is lean into the cinematics of the game, right? Like if I have my way, the reality of it is like it's hard to make everything flashy, but I want as much to be flashy as I can. Every mechanic that I touch, I want it to be balanced, but I want it to have an image that just pops in your head. You know, like this scene behind me here that I'm using as my background. This wasn't just a really cool piece of art from Guns and Gears, right? This was the Adventure Frosty Cup. We play tested a like all gun, or I think it was 3 gunslingers and an inventor, or, you know, like that kind of party during the playtest. And we ran it through Frosty Mug, and Black Powder Boost, the feat being illustrated, was an ability that we actually used several times during the fight as we were aiming for tactical positioning. And so that's, I very much like to take a cinematic image and then make sure that I translate as much of that image as possible into the game, so that when a player sits down and experiences it and tries to use it, like maybe their picture is different than mine, but they still know what it looks like. It's very vivid. And I think that that's kind of one of the freedoms of a tabletop RPG, right? Is you don't actually have any graphics, you know, in front of you, but it frees up your imagination to do the thing. And in a game like Pathfinder, where we have a lot of rules, I think that's really what the rules are there for, right? They're there to like broaden and brighten the brush strokes of your imagination as you play.
Yeah, absolutely. Something you said there that stuck out to me was everyone kind of has a different picture of what's happening specifically in the game, but mechanically we know everything that's going on. And I think those kind of feats always stand out to me the most, the ones that we, allows for a lot of flavor to be added. So if you wanted to, let's say, narrate your character as you're doing this, you can kind of come up with whatever fun flavor you want, but then you can come back to the mechanics with exactly how it functions in combat.
Yeah. And I also will just, I will walk right up to the line sometimes because I'm really comfortable there. Like, I know that my fantasy is probably about 10% weirder than like the general accepted fantasy, but I like to live close to that. In the character guide, we did a bunch of goblin stuff, and some of that was Mark taking some ideas I had and running with them in copy fit, but there was stuff like in the Pathfinder adventure card game, we had a card forever for a spell that was like flaming snot or something. And it's just a picture of a goblin like sneezing a big flaming gobbet out. And I was like, well, hey, now we're in Pathfinder 2nd edition. That's obviously an ancestry feat, right? Like you can set yourself on fire and launch flaming snot rockets. I probably should not have said those words in front of the editors now, though, because now it's flaming saliva. And it might have been my use of the words snot rocket that led them to feeling like maybe that needed to be adjusted there.
I don't know. I think Snot Rocket is a great way of calling it, though.
Absolutely.
It felt accurate, right? Like,
So when you were first hired by Paizo, what was it like working on your first ever assignment?
so I had been working on a whole bunch of third-party stuff within the sphere, and it was really kind of a weird thing. I had more writing credits than many of the people who were hired at Paizo in my same writing wave, but fewer connections at Paizo itself. And I will tell you, my interview, I had several things that I'm still a little like embarrassed about or that are really funny. One of them was they asked me like, what's a book you think we could do better on? And I'm not going to say the book or the person, but I immediately named a book where the cover author was the person interviewing me at that moment in time. So that was really exciting. And at some point during the interview, I said something to the effect of, obviously, you guys aren't going to do a second edition of Pathfinder, but if you were, or if you wanted to do some stuff that was in that direction, here are some ideas I have. And then like my first day actually in the office, they're like, hey, we have a meeting, but you actually can't come into the meeting until your NDA paperwork is taken care of. So you need to go talk to Adam Daigle. And I'm sitting in Eric Mona's office with Adam, and Adam's like, yeah, give me just a minute to get your paperwork here. Look at this in the meanwhile. And he slides this folder over to me, and I open it up, and I'm like, wow, this is really good Wayne Reynolds art. Like, this is all new stuff. A lot of iconics. Oh my God, there's a second edition of the game being made. And that was the point in time where I found out about Pathfinder 2nd edition. Which was really exciting. And, I didn't come into Paizo as a designer. I came in as a developer for Pathfinder Society. So we went and we did that meeting. And then immediately after that, John Compton was like, all right, we'll get you started with something light. Here's a block of 4 adventures that are all going to be compiled into a single quest packet. That's going to be a Gen Con release, by the way. So that should be real exciting for you. Let us know if you have questions. And, this is very kind of like a Paizo thing. There's constant improvements towards like getting people more training and support, but a lot of like getting the foot in the door is being able to hit the ground running. And that's been true of every position I've had since I've been there. I went straight into developing a scenario as a developer. When I became a designer, they were literally like, welcome to the design team. Glad to have you. We need to make a book called Guns and Gears, and it's already 3 weeks behind schedule. Good luck, sir.
I'm going to leapfrog off that because, you came out strong with Guns and Gears. And I think that was an excellent kind of tour de force of the design philosophy that I've seen kind of ripple through. So my question is, are there any other areas of any other subjects that really seem to spark creativity for you, or anything that you might want to explore a little more and feel like you haven't?
Yeah. So, if I answered your question at face value, this interview would not be long enough to cover it, right?
Yeah,
but definitely at Paizo, there's been a few things that have kind of been personal things I've been really invested in with the company. I'm from Alaska. I'm Alaskan Native Tlingit and Athabascan on my mom's side, mostly Tlingit, and then Irish on my dad's side. And so when I started at Paizo has a couple Native Alaskan Pacific Northwest analog peoples in its game, the Varki and the Arataki. And building them out, they were really kind of like brush strokes, when I came in, right? It was like, they're up here, there's some ideas, we know that their inspirations are from here, but they hadn't really had anybody who had the grounding and background to move with that. So I've done a fair bit of stuff with that, and I've been excited every time. On the Lost Omens line, I got to write the Varki Lenorm King Nanku, and then in Monsters of Myth, I did the Arctic monster Aina Maren, who was kind of a monster, but also kind of like a sympathetic figure. If you run into him, the chances of the party like hopefully befriending him should be about equally high with fighting him, if not more so. And so I really like that kind of storytelling. That also ties into another part of the setting that I've always been really interested in, and that I hope we do more with, which is the Sarkoris scar, which was the world wound in Pathfinder First Edition before they closed the big demon spewing hole up in Wrath of the Righteous. But there's still a lot of really cool stuff that goes on there. I really like their kind of, it's like beyond polytheistic and borderline animistic kind of religions, right? Because their priests are summoners and their gods are eidolons. And that's a really kind of fun concept to move with and explore, right? Like just the idea that like, sure, maybe our gods don't have a heavenly domain, but they've also never died ruining half of the world, and they're usually right down the street. So like your god might grant heal spells, but our god actively beats up demons in front of us on a pretty regular basis. That's cool, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So all of that is fun. Luis and I definitely put our heads together in Guns and Gears, and we're like, Arcadia. That's a book that's going to happen at some point, and really like my only doubt is whether or not I'm going to have the availability to convince Luis that I can write as much of that as I'd like to when it happens. God, it's a big world. I could go on for like a long time about all the things we can do with this game. It was almost a year and a half ago now. Somebody was like, so with Guns and Gears out and Secrets of Magic on the way, Pathfinder 2nd edition is almost complete, right? Like, what's even left for you guys to do? And I was like, you have no idea. You have no idea how far we can keep going with this, And I think Book of the Dead is a big hint about that, right? We're like, you want to play a skeleton, you can play a skeleton. Want to play a lich, you can play a lich. And all of this stuff is going to be structured so that, like, it fits, right? It works at the table. You don't have any of kind of the old school, older tabletop RPG things where you're like, well, yeah, you can be a lich. That means we've got to apply a 5-level adjustment to your character, and you're going to be really strong in some ways and really weak in other ways. Pathfinder 2nd edition has this really beautiful framework to it that is, really two people who you cannot give enough credit to are Logan Bonner and Mark Seifter, right? Because Mark applied a lot of really smart coding principles to the structure of the game that has given it a skeleton that I think is almost singularly sturdy amongst tabletop RPGs, right? We're far enough in that normally the seams would be starting to show on a tabletop RPG. And opinions may vary, but I think they're still remarkably tight, and that we've still got a lot of room to keep going forward with this, right? And Logan is this real steady hand that knows what he's doing, knows what's healthy, has years of experience across multiple editions that give him just really sharp instincts and make it. He's so strong as our lead designer because James and I can get a little wild because Logan is going to like pump the brakes when we start getting too close to the edge. And I think that's really where you get a book like Guns and Gears, where we did walk right up to the line, right? You've got black powder. You're literally, that's the thing. That's a feat, right? Like any gunslinger can do that. And it's like a 2nd level feat or something, it's not particularly out there for something you can achieve in the game.
Absolutely. Having a lot of really flavorful options available at low level is something that's really important to me because that means any character can pick it up. You can start doing those cool things earlier, and later, if you've got more flavorful feats that you want to pick up, and you have a level where you're not doing anything, boom, you throw that in there, and now you've got a more well-developed character narratively, which I definitely appreciate. You mentioned earlier as well that Pathfinder 2 is nowhere near even done with content. I read a comment today that made me chuckle. Someone was, because a common criticism of Pathfinder 2 is that not a lot of content is out yet, which anyone that follows Pathfinder 2 knows is pretty funny. And this was specifically comparing Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2. Somebody said, pick up Pathfinder 1 if you want a lot more options. Pick up Pathfinder 2 if you want more of a stable game. And I first off think Pathfinder 2 has just so many options right now, and I having a little bit of foresight into kind of where that's going. I can see that expanding exponentially, and having more options. But that all is structured on that base you said, which is just the meme Pathfinder has some tight math. That It's hard to break, and so far, I mean, very earnestly, I've seen hardly any feats or skills or anything that I think could possibly really have the potential of breaking the game. And that's good to see this early on, because we know as it's going to be developed, we're going to have that solid foundation to build on.
Yeah. I am not going to dunk on Pathfinder First Edition. First of all, I love Pathfinder First Edition. It was, kind of my entry into tabletop RPG design. Before I was designing for Pathfinder First Edition, I was in banking, and I was much wealthier and much less happy with my life. But when it comes to breadth of options, I do have to point out that one of the things that is easy to overlook is that if you want to make a gun-wielding version of each class in Pathfinder First Edition, you either need 38 archetypes or you need to multi-class into gunslinger on every build, right? In Pathfinder Second Edition, so 38 archetypes, an archetype is between a page and a spread, right? So you're looking at maybe call it 76 pages, right? It took us one to have the same amount of content enter the game in Pathfinder Second Edition because of that structure of class feats, archetypes, etc. You can achieve those things, and they really do have a level of depth and nuance that is on par with that level of depth and nuance you get out of PF1. The system itself is just more efficient, and that means you can't judge the content just based on the number of books, right? Like, if you shift that framework from looking at the number of books to looking at the number of builds, Pathfinder Second Edition and Pathfinder First Edition are much closer to each other content-wise than it might seem at a casual glance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I definitely think, like, speaking as somebody who does a lot of like both third-party homebrew and runs a lot of like games, I think that the core structure of PF2 is so like solid that we have Pathfinder Infinite, for example, that has just allowed for third-party creators to further expand on it. And from what I've bought and read, it all just seamlessly like works and flows so well together. Like, just even seeing like let's say Dragonkin from Luis Loza still fits like so well into the structure. It's honestly impressive as like a TTRPG going like forward. I think you're right. Guns and Gears has definitely brought a new level of, I wouldn't say insanity. I think that's just a poor choice of wording, but like it definitely towed this line of, well, you could have a portal gun, but then, also pick up running reload, and plays with this nice like balance.
And you mentioned homebrew, actually, and I think that's something where this great foundation really shines. Is I was someone who, I've been vocal about this. I was very wary of homebrew when I first started. I think with a system where the math is this tight, my first thought was, oh, well, it's already good as is. You don't need to pick up things elsewhere. Like, really, I mean, and this is a little true that, you can make a build that does just about anything with, just, let's say, the core rule book or, all Pathfinder 2 books of 2 ebooks available. But as I've taken more of a deeper look into the homebrew that's been available, I see that, especially with the game mastery guide, where we get laid out the more specifics of how, the inner machinations of the game work, I think it's easier to then build the homebrew off of that, because we see exactly how that math works. And personally, philosophically, I really align with that approach from Paizo. Why not put that information out there, make it more available to players, let them see how the game works so that they can design it and use it to best meet their own needs?
Yeah, I've done a few ancestries for Pathfinder 2nd edition now, and I did, quite a few races for Pathfinder 1st edition in third party. And like the framework that I have to work in Pathfinder 1st edition, there's like a hard line, right? Like anything below that line is more or less a balanced race. Anything above that line, you just kind of have to accept like this is stronger. Maybe don't play this unless you're okay with that, or maybe don't allow this into your game unless you're okay with that. But I've managed to do some really fun stuff. Sorry, I had to pause and think, like, what ancestries can I actually talk about? Let me make sure I don't spoil something I shouldn't be spoiling here. I'm gonna pick an Infinite thing, actually. I wrote Lomelings of Galarian, which is on Infinite, and they're like a race of an ancestry of mole folk, right? They're bipedal moles. They have a lot of earth themes and mole abilities. And I wanted to do, stuff with them that it was kind of complex. I was like, I want them to actually interface with the world through scent. So their sight is super limited to like 10 feet, and it's an imprecise sense, but they have precise smell and they can burrow. And all of these things are really complex. And frankly, in a system that was less sturdy, it would be very hard to do any of them without breaking the system, right? But because you have the tree of ancestry feats to work on, and you have the ability to say like, well, here's the starting appropriate version. Here's the version that's appropriate for a little bit higher. And then here's where we can just take the cap off that. And you can do this thing because enough people are going to be doing that thing or similar that it's fine. It's so fun, right? And it allows you to get deeper into these things and inject so much more flavor than you can inject into a stat block that has to fit in a space like that big,
So kind of bouncy off that, what is something that will always keep drawing you back to Pathfinder 2nd edition, besides, of course, it being your actual job?
I legitimately kind of have a hard time playing other crunchy RPGs. If I'm gonna play a crunchy RPG, it almost has to be Pathfinder 2nd edition, because I love how easy it is to build stuff. I love how easy it is to explain to people, and how easy it is to even bring in other players where they're like, man, this is so much. And I'm like, look, just look at the traits, do the thing the ability says. And if you're unsure about how it interacts with that, literally just tell me as the GM what the traits are, and I can fill you in. And then they pick it up real quick, right? And then they know the traits. And usually if one of their feats has those traits, then they're going to end up with another feat that also has the trait. And because it's so methodical and built in such an intentional way, it's easy to teach, it's easy to play. And as I was mentioning earlier, that modularity to it means that like I haven't gotten to play outside of like single player play testing half of the things I've written. So I'm gonna keep coming back at least until I finish doing all that, because I would never write something in the game that I was not excited about having in the game, right? I absolutely hate anything that is a choice, right? One of the criticisms of some older RPGs is you have to choose between flavor and crunch, right? Do I get power attack, which is just objectively a super good feat, or do I take merfolk spines where I get a poison spine attack that is probably going to be really weak at quite a few levels, but is so perfect for my character? I want you to do both. If you're going to have merfolk spines, I want your merfolk spines to be awesome, and for you to feel as good about the fact that you took them as you felt taking power attack, maybe just a little bit better, because power attack is kind of I apologize to any of my coworkers for what I am about to say if it offends you. Power attack is one of those feats that exists because it needs to exist, but fundamentally it's bland, right? The story of power attack is I hit you extra hard. That's the story of power attack. And it's cool, and you need stuff like that in the game. You have to lay the foundation, but once the foundation is laid, and maybe while the cement is still a little bit wet so you can go lay some handprints in it, that's the time to make sure you got the really fun stuff. You need to have a power attack for the people who don't want to get too weird, but I also think you need something else in that same slot, you know. If you followed the stuff I've worked on, I've got stuff like Fane's Forbery, which is a rogue swashbuckler stance where you can throw cards. I've got the Rain of Embers line of feats, which builds into exploding death drop. Shared credit on that one with Leo Glass, because we workshopped what those abilities should be for a NPC who appeared in a scenario. And then that NPC became way more popular than anybody kind of predicted she was going to be. So we were like, all right, let's just turn those all into player feats, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
When you mentioned kind of different approaches to the power attack philosophy, what immediately comes to my mind is Furious Finish. I'm currently playing a Barbarian. To me, that's a great one because you're getting the mechanical benefits of a little extra damage, which honestly, early levels is a lot. It's pretty awesome. But you know, every time I've used it, I've had this big moment, you know, and often I'm using a hero point on that Furious Finish because I want to hit this. I want my Barbarian to just end their finish, and often the fight with this gigantic hit that's going to deal a lot of damage and can be flavorful in all the ways that I describe it. Not to say that power attack can't be that, you know, you can describe the ways that, you know, you're making your attack a little different, that's a little more powerful. And I do think there's a lot of player agency to do that. But, you know, as I'm looking through, the best feats that always stand out the most to me are the ones where I can just picture my character doing it right off the back with some big flourish, and I know it's going to have an impact both mechanically and in character narratively.
Yeah, it's you know, Logan, that was something that I've heard Logan say many times. Whenever we have a discussion about a mechanic and we kind of hit the point where we're like, okay, we know what the balance of the numbers is, but is this still the best it can be? You know, Logan will always bring it back to, what is the story of this item? What is the story of this feat? And I think that is such an incredibly smart and valuable thing, you know, because of the fact that he always asks it. It's now something that I always ask myself, right? And I think because of the fact that one of my personal goals is to ensure that the game always feels cinematic, that question is even more valuable, right? Because it's easy to make a feat that's like, deal 2 extra damage under these circumstances. But does that tell a story? Does that really create a picture for you? Or is it just kind of a nice mechanical ribbon that does a thing, but it only contributes to one side of the game, right? I don't buy into the ROLL play versus ROLE play like at all, because I think they're interwoven, and the better that you do it right, the less of the difference there is between anybody leaning on either side of that, you know?
Yeah.
But I do think that, like, and I would tell anybody who sees this, you guys said, you know, you do your own homebrew and stuff. I literally cannot think of a more powerful piece of advice when you're doing that than ask yourself multiple times while you're working on whatever it is, what is the story here? You know, what is the story I want to tell? What is the story I want people to read? And what is the story that I want people to experience when they sit down and play with this at the table?
I'm not somebody that messes around with homebrew too much, but I am working on a one shot right now that I have plans to publish, and something in it that I'm toying with. The idea is a talisman that has huge implications on the game, right? So like, this is just a throwaway idea, but like a talisman, for example, that could like instantly kill someone, but possibly kill the user, something like that, where I like those kind of ideas because they can have big impacts with something like a talisman, something that's consumable. You know, you're only going to use it once. If a GM is comfortable with an item like that, being able to give it to players and say, here, now your game looks different than it looked before you have it. You have this on the table at all times, and stuff like that intrigues me. I really like it.
So, you know, I worked on the orc ancestry in the APG. I mentioned that earlier, right? And one of the things I really leaned into, you know, with feats like Death's Drums and all of these things that tie into orc ferocity, right, was if you're playing an orc, I wanted you to feel like just ridiculously tough, but I also wanted your adrenaline to just kind of stay up the whole session, right? And they have a lot of abilities that do that, because you kind of get stronger when you're riding the line, right? Yeah. There's a certain point in time when you're playing an orc, especially at higher levels, where the healer's like, should I hit you? And you're like, oh, maybe give it a round. maybe I will regret having said that when the end of the next round comes around, but right now I'm living in the moment, and it's as exciting as it is terrifying. And I think that's just such a cool thing, is any mechanic that evokes an emotion that you actively experience during the game, right?
Orc ferocity. I for literally years, I saw that feat, and it's a common game mechanic to, instead of dying, go to 1 HP, and I always take it when I can in video games and the like. But I had always made builds, and I struggled to really fit the orc ancestry into those builds, and that's on me. Sometimes I focus a little too much on the mechanics, but I finally had a build. I'm playing a barbarian this AP, and I'm like, I'm going for the orc, and I'm taking orc ferocity. And not only have I used it almost every battle, but it's changed the way I approach, the turn by turn combat. Because I know I can be an idiot. I can run up there, hit him with the furious finish, maybe even miss, and I know I can die. There's a chance that I'm going to die after that attack, but I always have that orc ferocity to fall back on and put me at 1 HP.
It's still terrifying, because you're right on the edge, right?
Yes.
And now you've got 1 hit point and wounded 1, so that next hit, if it's coming in, is dangerous. But I do like living on the edge a little bit, as long as it's intentional, right? And if you choose an orc, you're probably intentionally, especially an orc barbarian, you're probably intentionally choosing to live on the edge at least a little bit.
I think that's really
orc or barbarian, so no magic healing.
Yeah, that is maybe not quite hard mode, but it's definitely living on the edge. Yeah.
I like hard mode. That's me thing.
I think definitely TUI lent itself to this such a unique experience where, for instance, I'm playing a gunslinger and I'm way of the sniper. So I'm literally I'm going to stay in the back. I have my one ability, which is just 1 shot, 1 kill that I'll only get to use once a turn, but I don't care. And then, I love that you could balance this, what Eli has, which is this, I'm this upfront orc barbarian, and I'm going to live on the edge. And then here's just some android Duskwalker just going pew, reload, pew. And then having the what you mentioned earlier, which I really wanted to build off of, was at let's say 4th level, you have something like Black Powder Boost, which is this insane stuff. But you also have running reload, which for me, running reload works just better with the build, because I'm definitely a guy who just wants to stay as far away from everybody. And if you have cover, that is the one thing I want to take care of. I don't need to blast all over the map, but if somebody's a pistolero or drifter, this, where you have such a interesting balance between their you can go as crazy as you want. That's what I always telling players in TUI. They're you can go for just a human fighter who just has a sword, who has his power attack, and then you could play a leshy tiefling who could summon a phantom and has the sniping duo archetype, favorite archetype. And then, and I just think TUI just has this great, foundation. I think that we've already established this, but just this, sheer balance. And I really like that Guns and Gears in particular walked this line. And I'm really hoping, as we see, Book of the Dead comes out, which is, you could be a lich if you want to be. I think going forward and seeing where Thaumaturge, Psychic, and so on and so forth with the books, I don't know, I think it's just truly interesting to just see you guys walk the line of, okay, this could be a little ridiculous in this situation, and if you're a new player, you don't want to read the brick of text that goes with it, here's a simple option.
You mentioned, James, that you really liked the sniping duo archetype, right? And I knew that was going to be popular, because when I put it in the outline for Guns and Gears, before we had any authors attached, before we even really had anything more than sketch pads of ideas for the classes, that was in the outline, sniping duo archetype for spotter and shooter and, et cetera, et cetera. And James Jacobs was like, this is really exciting to me. This is really cool. I love, teamwork mechanics, and I really like this idea. And I do not mean to give the impression that James Jacobs and I disagree. We actually agree on more stuff than we disagree on. But I tend to know when we're at that stage in a process, if Jacobs and I are both really excited about an idea, then we represent, collectively a very broad cross section of the consumer base. And that is probably a really fun idea. The one that was kind of I knew people were going to love it. Sifter knew people were going to love it, but we really weren't 100% sure what the broader reception was going to be, was the unexpected sharpshooter.
The unexpected sharpshooter, oh my gosh, is one of the very few that I'm like, oh, that's scary dangerous if used correctly. But I love it.
The final feat is literally just like, you cause mayhem, 3 actions, good luck.
Yeah, it does one thing that I've seen fans tend to not like, which is it has a lot of like once per long time period abilities, right? They're crazy good. And frankly, like the fact that they are so, just wild and over the top and big. And it's like, I fired a bullet, it bounced off a frying pan, set fire to the kitchen, and then knocked out a loose nail in the water tower, which then collapsed and took out, like those several horses or whatever kind of the situation like that those abilities enable. The story calls for them to be time limited, because if they happen all the time, then you lose the unexpected and unexpected sharpshooter, right? But it is the kind of thing where we're behind the scenes like, oh, I hope the fans don't hate this because we're real excited about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, thinking about, so there's the kind of person that'll look at it just from a pure mechanic standpoint, like, oh, this is very good, or I think this is weak, or and so forth. But I love what you mentioned about some feats needing to be once a day, because that works well narratively as well, because it's letting characters, once a day, X times a session, do one big thing and stand out. And, isn't that why we're playing tabletop role-playing games, to have these big fun moments? And having feats that are built to do that, to me, is perfect. I'll play a vanilla fighter who does nothing all game, but, like 2 or 3 times a day can do one crazy thing. That's always going to, interest me, because that's how we make these memorable moments looking back. Oh, I remember the time you kicked that guy in the face and did 54 damage on a crate. Yeah, I had a bow. I could have used that, but it was better that I kicked him. Little things like that always stick with me personally.
The way that I look at it is, if it is a once a day, or, once per, what works out to be like once per session or whatever, if it's that kind of ability, it has to be a spotlight ability, right? It has to be something that everybody who was sitting at the table when it happened remembers and is still talking about the next time everybody sits down to play. Like that is what those have to be. And that's something that, like, personally is where I will go back and tweak if I need to. If I have something like that and I play test it with a group and I don't get somebody at the table who's like, what? Or, I don't get like that pop from everybody around me, then I'm like, this is not a time limited ability. This isn't quite doing the thing yet. We gotta ratchet something, crank something up there until we get that.
Changing gears a little bit here. If I understand it, you've been a long-time figure in the Paizo boards, Michael?
I have been on the Paizo forums for quite a few years now, yes.
Okay, so what has your time there, what lessons has that taught you that you find maybe impacts the way you create content or the way you look at the game? I find that, the hive mind of the forums, good and bad, I think it still inspires a lot of thought. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you in that aspect?
My goodness. So, the first thing that I ever got published was a Pathfinder first edition third-party product called The Genius Guide to Bravery Feats. And it was a bunch of Pathfinder first edition feats that latched on to the fighter's bravery class feature and took it from like, I hate doing this. I hate when I'm going to say things and somebody at work is going to give me a look when I get back in. But bravery was kind of like a boring little like ribbon thing. It wasn't bad, like, and the fighter needed it because they had poor will saves, and this at least like made fear less of an issue for them, right? But something that, instead of something the player scribbled down on their character sheet with and then never considered again, right? Something that they actively engaged with. That was kind of the goal of that. And Sean Reynolds like gave me some advice and was like, hey, here's some, you know, things to consider when you're working on mechanics and you know, stuff like this. And Owen Casey Stevens, I was directed to him by another person on the boards who had written for him, who was also a, you know, Paizo freelancer. And so, you know, I joined the forums at this really great time where I was just surrounded by creative people, and the Paizo employees were really actively engaged. You know, I think we do still have very active employees who like to talk to the community. I think what's just happened is that it's not really centralized on the Paizo boards anymore. I know, like, I spend a lot of time on the Pathfinder 2e subreddit just because I think that that's such like a vibrant, great community. You've got people with really good ideas. It's constantly growing, and there are new people coming in. And it's a really cool place where I get to interact with people who haven't made their way to the Paizo forums yet. And I think that's just kind of a cool place to be existing when you're a designer on a game, right? Is in an area where you have that really great kind of you know, coastal delta of people who are deep in the game and people who are just kind of coming into the game for the first time.
And you can go on to a Reddit forum or I'm sorry, a Reddit post or a Paizo forum and officially answer questions, because people will take, you know, your word at that. Do you like the power? Is it scary?
It's concerning, like more than anything. Like sometimes it's fun, but like one of the things that is tricky for me is having to pump the brakes, right? Because sometimes there's like, you see a question and you're like, I want to help you out in your situation right now, but the thing that I want to tell you is not something that I want everybody to take as an official ruling. And literally, I can't help that, right? Like whatever I say, once it is out there in the world, people are going to be like, well, Michael Sayre said, and those links live forever, right? Like they don't disappear. People pull stuff from, honestly, sometimes much farther back than is wise. You know? Because it's tricky when you got a living game. You know, there's an entire team of designers who make decisions on what's healthy, what we need to errata, what we need to do FAQs for. And every once in a while, just because we're a team putting out a lot of books with a lot of stuff, sometimes we find out, oh, you thought that said this, because the entire time I said this, and we had a whole conversation where we were apparently talking directly past each other. It doesn't happen too often, you know, but every once in a while it does. And sometimes, you know, we've gone through 3 designers since I've been here. Steven left right after we launched the core rulebook. Liz was scooped up by WotC, and then I was hired to, you know, step into her place. And then we just lost Mark. They've all moved on to bigger and better things. But the reality is those are 3 incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent, incredibly skilled people. And just the sheer amount of institutional knowledge that exists in them is hard to transfer. And so sometimes that means there's some little gray corner case that exists, you know, in a part of the game that literally no one brought up until suddenly it pops up in a Reddit thread and then everybody wants to know. And maybe the person who was 100% sure what that answer is does not work for the company anymore. And so we've got to come up with the answer. And the flip side of that is, you know, who knows where I'm going to be in 5 years, you know, hopefully still at Paizo, but, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in, you know, the world of gaming and tabletop RPGs, and who knows? So I don't want to leave tripwires and landmines for the people who come after me by, you know, having everybody in the forums be like, well, Michael said this in a post, and literally all 36, 39, whatever the number is, 1,000 of us have been taking that as canon for the last 2 years. I just don't want to do that to another human being, you know?
So to kind of build off of this, have you ever run into like a post that is just like, oh, I wish I could answer this, but like it will give away like a next book? Like I remember Gunslinger was something like that people asked. It's the plate. I mean, literally the playtest announcement was, when are we getting Gunslinger? Was it like, you know, reading these posts and just going, oh, I know the answer. I know, like, if I just say this one thing, then, like, obviously I'll get in trouble because of NDAs, but, like, what does it feel like seeing the fans, like, wanting something, and then when you deliver it, how does, like, the reaction feel?
So it feels really good when I see people like, man, I can't believe they still haven't done X. And I'm like, literally, it's open in a Word doc on my desktop right now. Right. Like that's a great feeling. The kind of downside to the having that knowledge that I've had to like live through a few times is I have a lot of friends in the third party community, publishers who are really talented, really skilled people who just don't work for Paizo for a variety of reasons. They live too far away for it to be practical. They have another job that is like their primary thing, just whatever the case may be. And that's the one where it's like, when I knew Pathfinder 2nd edition was coming out, and I also knew all of these people who had really big books whose sales were going to get hit in the teeth when we announced a new edition at Paizo. And I can't say anything, right? Like I cannot say a word because anything I say is going to violate my NDA. I've just got to sit on it. Or like in the case of Guns and Gears, literally I saw third-party products dropping for like guns and an inventor class like a week before we announced Guns and Gears. I was like, oh God, I feel so bad for what we're about to do to you. I'm so sorry.
Hijinks, shout out, friend of the show, dropping the Magic School show like a month before Secrets of Magic was released. Heart goes out to him. I love you guys. Everyone should go check out Hijinks.
So how has your experience with game design affect the way that you see the TTRPG industry as a whole, and more specifically Paizo going forward?
It is a very interesting question. I will start by saying Pathfinder 2nd edition, it just in and of itself was this huge learning experience for me. It was a level of tabletop game design that I had not seen before, like just the methodicalness of it, the strength of that skeleton. But, I've also learned that sometimes there are decisions you make for the community that frankly were maybe not actually the healthiest decision for the game. And so definitely my perspective has kind of broadened and lengthened in my time as a designer, in seeing more of the back end and seeing the progress, that we make and stuff. I am sure the day will come, may it be many years from now, where we do Pathfinder 3rd edition, right? And I strongly suspect it will look a lot like Pathfinder 2nd edition. But I also think that something Pathfinder 2nd edition is doing right now is it is building a community. It is reteaching people what a crunchy RPG can be. Because like Pathfinder 1st edition and 5e, they're really big on big numbers, right? Like one of the things they do, in one of the ways their punch really comes into play is in that, like, I'm just going to do something that everybody at the table is going to WTF about, right? Like, I am going to blow up something that I should not be able to blow up. I am going to put together this hilarious Cavalier teamwork combo where I'm going to charge twice for 1,000 damage. I'm going to do these things. And so Pathfinder 2nd edition really kind of has this burden that it is carrying, which is reminding people of the value of +1, right? Like, I honestly, I can tell you, so the War Priest doctrine on the Cleric is a point of some contention amongst the community. And I think what it has kind of settled into is that people generally accept that it is good at what it does, but that is not necessarily what they wish it did, right? I'm treading on dangerous ground here for you guys. Like,
no,
this is hot material. The people want to know.
But here's the thing that's really interesting, right? If you go back to the playtest, a proficiency bump was only +1, not +2, right? The War Priest would feel literally 100% better if proficiency bumps were only +1s. The reason that it feels as rough as it does is because of how big each proficiency step is, and the fact that because of how powerful the buffs it has access to are, that fixes where it has to live on the proficiency tree, right? And it's better than it gets credit for, in my opinion.
Same.
But I do understand why people arrive where they do, and it's because you have to work just a little bit harder because of the core skeleton of the system. If there comes a day many years from now where we are looking at Pathfinder 3rd edition and what we might want to do, one of the most valuable things that Pathfinder 2nd edition may have done for us in, the intervening decade or whatever the time frame is retraining an entire community to recognize the value of +1 in a tabletop RPG.
Yeah, and you can say so much about that. I mean, I immediately think of, all of the White Room mechanists out there that like figuring out all of the specific bonuses and the math behind everything. You mentioned the War Priest has access to a lot of buffs that are huge. And I think people forget about that. It's important when you're looking at something like Pathfinder, any TTRPG, to take a step back and look at the whole thing, because everything has implications on everything else. And when, people make these builds in White Rooms, often it doesn't give a whole picture of what actual combat looks like, or how the math actually works out. My joking example is always electric arc. Yes, it technically deals more damage over time than telekinetic projectile, but if I'm going to sit there and zap somebody for 2 damage over and over, or just hit him with a rock for 10 and take them down in 1 turn, that looks very different mechanically, even though mathematically electric arc might look better on paper. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and James, you were talking about how you play a sniper, right? And the reality of the matter is that a sniper and a war priest are 2 different expressions of kind of this same fundamental concept, which is preparation and then single big execution, right? Like they really are operating under that same kind of paradigm.
No, I think it's funny because I literally went from War Priest right to Sniper. And the fact that you mentioned it is just like, wait, hold on. This does track super well. Because, I think a lot of people, when it comes to, War Priest or Warrior Muse Bard, is just, I think they're looking at just the numbers and comparing it to, they're not a fighter. They're not as good as fighter. It's just, nothing is supposed to be as good as the fighter. It's in their name. But, there's I think when it comes to preparation, you're when it comes to War Priest, you have access to so much. You have Bless, which will give you a permanent +1. You will have Emblazoned Armament, which would give you an additional +1. You've already made up for the small gap you're already going for. Fighter, even if you multi-class, could never touch the amount of spell slots you're going to have as a War Priest.
A fighter can't true strike every one of their attacks.
Exactly, and then I think what's on top of that is you're going to spend a lot of 2 actions. I think what Pathfinder does really well is both spells are within the 1 to 2 action range. I mean, granted, they're now the 3 and 2 round castings, but I think they're forgetting a lot of, I can cast 2 action harm, deal 10d10 plus 80, and then immediately follow up with a scimitar attack at full bonus to hit, no multiple attack penalty. And I think Pathfinder does this great, and it took me a long time to finally understand fully of the implications of it. And this is why I love playing prepared spellcasters so damn much. It's just because if you have system mastery of the game to because I've been playing since playtest, at Gen Con playtest, I think the more you understand it, you can just set up insane stuff. I literally mapped out by way of the sniper character levels 1 through 20. I'm just by the time I'm level 20, I can just cover, reload, and then headshot. And if I want 1 shot, 1 kill, I could use my specific advanced deed. And then and it's such I love about this preparedness of, if you just understand there's no trap feats anymore. So I can literally just be I stride, headshot, next turn, reload, and then, just continue this slew of damage. And then, cast magic weapon on myself and get 56 points of damage on a crit, because Jezels are freaking insane. Sorry.
Yeah.
Long tangent there.
No, I do think something that really I enjoy about Pathfinder 2 is I do think it has a high skill ceiling, or at least understanding/knowledge ceiling, because the more you understand the game, the better you're going to be. And we've talked about this before, but teamwork being so vital in Pathfinder 2. You know, you can min-max a character as hard as you want. You're not going to beat somebody that's using good synergy with their team. That's always going to be the best option. And likewise, somebody that understands character building really well, you know, you can't go wrong building a character. I think it would be almost hard to build a character that didn't function well in the game, both inside and outside of combat. But as you learn the game more, as you have put your hands on multiple feats and you're trying things out, you do kind of understand the overall picture of how to build a character, and you can find these cool interactions that otherwise people might miss when they're just looking for the most +2 bonuses. Michael, if you could have a no questions asked green light on any project of your choice, what would that be? Even if it's something that you think is maybe a little unmarketable right now, just personally, like if you get a green light on anything, what would you want to do?
I want to do a book full of legacy style game mechanics and instructions that it's like, so we've got Kingmaker, which is here's how to build a kingdom over the course of a single adventuring party's lifetime, right? And I want to do a book, like the book that I kind of most want to do for Pathfinder 2nd edition is a book that's like, maybe I only get to 5th level on my first character, and then that is now an 80-year-old human, and I want to be able to bequeath some piece of that character onto my next character, who is the 2nd generation entry in this, you know, story. And, you know, maybe my 1st gen character was a warrior king who founds a kingdom, right? So my 2nd gen is his daughter who is a wizard, but because dad was, you know, a warrior, she gets like free archetype fighter, or she gets a specific fighter feat that her dad knew because he taught her that, or something like that. And I would probably want to throw in a class with, I'm actually not spoiling anything right now because I said this on the forums before I was even a designer, so it is known that I want these things. One of the things that I kind of would throw in with that probably would be like a herald class, which is a very like socially oriented, something kind of like the envoy from Starfinder, but with like a really, really thick fantasy skin on it. You know, the bard without magic, the martial archetype turned into a full class, like that kind of deal. And just build this whole thing for like, here's how to build a campaign that you and your friends could play for a decade together, and not just be the same characters, but be able to move to new characters in a way that feels natural. And maybe your buddy just wants to play one character, so he plays that elf archer who we've now been playing for 10 years. He's 500 years old, and I'm on my 5th human who has now reached middle age, right? Like, I would love to make sure that before we close the book on Pathfinder 2nd edition, that we put something like that out there for people, something that really has that kind of deep longevity and tells a type of story that frankly is pretty, I think it's pretty popular. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who's played Romancing Saga 3 on 4 different systems, you know?
I find it interesting that sometimes people need to be told your character doesn't need to die when you're done with them. You know, if you want to retire a character and play someone else, that's fine. You know, in our group, we switch characters every so often, and, you know, then those characters pop up later in the story, and that's so fun. And I think the idea of having legacy characters that mechanically had ways to pass down things to your future characters would be awesome. I would definitely enjoy that. And then last question here. You know, you're the new hire on Paizo, new person on board. If thinking about kind of your own legacy, if you could change the direction of the boat just 1 degree in a certain direction, is there anything that comes to mind, like how you would like your work to be seen down the line by the small incremental changes you're making now?
It's a difficult thing to answer, right? Because I was here when this system was being made, but I didn't have my fingers directly in it. And there are certainly things that I maybe would have done differently, but I don't know that I would change many of them at this point in the process. But I will say, I think definitely the thing that I want to do is I want to keep pushing the edges of what fantasy is, right? Because to me, fantasy is so broad, right? I think about like when I was a little kid and I was watching, old El Santo movies, like El Santo versus the vampires and these things. And, and he's a luchador. He's just a wrestler in a flashy costume, but he fights monsters. And that's fantasy, right? That is just as much fantasy as Conan the Barbarian. And that is why I wrote a wrestler archetype that ended up in Grand Bazaar, and I think there is so much stuff that like often kind of gets crowded out because it's too specific a flavor of fantasy for a certain crowd. And I empathize with the fact that they want to play a particular type of game, and maybe the direction I want Pathfinder to move in is not parallel or quite aligned with that direction. But at that same time, I think Pathfinder's greatest value in the greater sphere of tabletop RPGs is the fact that it takes the time to try and talk to everybody and look at what everybody's version of fantasy is. The James Case calls the kind of the older generations who were at the company before us the old ones. And, one of the things we talk about is like the old ones did not believe us when we said Leshy were going to be huge and that people were going to lose their mind over Leshies, right? And the long and the short of that is that now they're like, okay, the next time a Leshies comes around, say something to us and we swear we'll listen.
Also, we're now selling Leshy plushies if everyone wants to get some. I work at an art school, and you really resonated with me when you were talking about the things that you're passionate about that maybe the greater world might not be, but it will really market to, a very specific kind of person that's looking for different kinds of fantasies. And I always, tell my students, follow your passions. Like that's the best way to make the best kind of art, the best way to be creative and have good output. So I'm all for you. The more specific we can go with these kind of things, not only to give those fantasies the options available to people who want them, but also to inspire people who otherwise might not see that as something interesting. The luchador, for example, the wrestler archetype, that might not be something somebody considered, but as I was reading the suplex feat, I'm like, yes, I want to do this. This is awesome. I now want to play a wrestler. And I love things that inspire me to have those moments.
I am playing a champion wrestler right now because I wanted to go ultimate tank.
Suplex.
And there is, combining that level of control with, the champion's defensive abilities, it's so sweet. It's so good. But we had a moment where we were playing through Malevolence, and I had grabbed an Attic Whisperer in one hand, and I was like, okay, out of character, like real quick, I know that the tactically correct thing for me to do here is to just continue holding on to this Attic Whisperer because it burned its entire turn trying to escape from me and couldn't do it, right? Like it lost a whole turn to it. And I was like, so clearly, tactically, the best thing for me to do is just to continue holding on to it. But I could suplex. And the entire rest of the party was like, always suplex.
Yeah, absolutely suplex.
One, don't disagree. Always suplex. But I think what's really nice with what Pathfinder 2 has done with the Lost Omens line is you guys now can walk this balance of our core like big books like Book of the Dead is like, okay, this is generalized, if you want to play undead of any region, like this is how you do it. But in like the Lost Omens books, you can go like down to like the nitty gritty. This is Tian Sha. This is like if you want like like an Asian feeling fantasy setting, or if you want like if that's not what you particularly want, you can always go over to Katapesh if you wanted like big markets, or my favorite always will be Numeria and getting robots and Conan the Barbarian settings. So I'd be like, I think having this nice balance in 2E where the core rule books definitely lay out the ground of it, where like Gunslinger is very, I wield gun, I could shoot, psychics are, I could do cool psionic stuff. And then like you get I would say the crazier, like a little bit more pushing the boundaries of where 2E can go is in these Lost Omens lines, because you can get hyper specific. And if you want to be a, Kellid barbarian who wields like sky metal swords. Like you get down to the wire, like literally to the sky metal stat block.
Yeah, and more options is always better in my opinion. I mean, within limits maybe, but this is where something where, you know, I play 5e every week. I'm a fan. I like it. But I do find myself so limited when it comes to character creation because I've been spoiled with Pathfinder 2e. You know, I know all the different options that I could have available, and that's something that interests me because why not have more options and more things to choose from, more possibility of flavor? That's always going to be what I'm drawn to. All right.
I entirely agree. Sorry.
No. Do another take of that. You entirely agreeing where I'm not interrupting you.
I entirely agree.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you much, Michael, for spending some time with us tonight. I really, really earnestly enjoyed this interview and getting a chance to speak with you. This has been Deadly DA. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We appreciate you tuning in. James, any last words?
Divide suplex, anyone?
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see ya.
Bye.